Hello guys, and welcome to a new Steel Division video today by me, Vulcan. Today I have for you the updated battle group overview for the 2nd Infantry Division, also known as the Indianhead. So the 2nd Infantry, famous for their Rangers, really awesome division, really quite strong, but has undergone quite a lot of changes, not only by myself in terms of adjusting what units I do and don't bring, but also in terms of balance as well, and we'll go through some of that as we continue. So let's start off with the Recon tab as usual. So in the Recon tab, the main difference here is that I've changed the Recon from Recon in M20s to Recon in Jeeps. Basically, the reason for that is because the income for the 2nd Infantry is only 75 per minute in Phase A. So cheaper the better in most cases. And being able to bring in Recon for 30 points is much nicer than having to bring in Recon for 55 points. Also, since you want to be using your Ranger Marauder sparingly, having some extra availability of Recon that can be a little bit more aggressive is very nice. So having those Recon squads there is welcome, and 4 availability is better than 3, of course. So Ranger Marauders are a must. They are 2-star bazooka squads, which now have 9 accuracy on their bazooka instead of 7. That was a recent balance update. So Ranger Marauders better than ever. They have the very high optics that you need, and they are much more likely to hit than they used to be. So reliable as well. Fantastic. Moving into Phase B, I removed the M8s that I used to have, and I've replaced them with Scouts. Again, for more availability of infantry recon, but also, of course, for this M3 Scout, which has the 50 cal machine gun. Great fire support, is a small armoured vehicle, so it's not going to get taken out by light arms fire itself. Great combination. And for 55 points apiece, moving into Phase B and C, it's not too much to ask. That's nice. And that's my Recon tab. Not too much to really talk about, just a couple changes, and yeah, you're good. So let's move on to the Infantry tab. This is where things are nice and exciting for the 2nd Infantry. You get access to all of the Ranger units. Now, a lot of people look at the Rangers, and I think, honestly, they get overrated quite a lot. Recently, I showed a video where I was playing as the 91st Luftlander, and you saw 2 units of Ersatztruppen demolish a unit of Ranger supports at close range. And Ranger supports, I think, are probably the most misused unit in the game, and probably one of the most overrated infantry units, at least. Now, Ranger supports, if you have a command with you, and they become 3-star, then they are extremely strong, and their lethality is great. They can demolish infantry squads very quickly, but only if you keep them at over 200 meter range of whatever you're firing at. If you keep them in the forests, for example, and you bump into enemy infantry, it's always going to be within that 200 meter engagement range, and therefore your machine guns won't fire. And then what are you left with? 3 HE on a 6-man squad. It's not going to end well, trust me. So if you're going to bring in Ranger supports, and if you're going to commit to bringing in more than 1 card, I only bring in 1, then make sure you use them correctly. The 8 HE on their 30 cals, accompanied by the other 2 rifles, is fantastic. Engagement range of 300 meters will incorporate all of their firing, or 200 meters, sorry. If you get them at that sweet spot, you'll be hitting them with 11 HE with a 3-star infantry squad. And that will hurt. That will definitely hurt your opponents. So make good use of that. But if you're engaging them at 100 meters, there's no chance that you're going to do anywhere near as much damage. So make sure you use them properly. As for Ranger assaults, now these are a different kettle of fish, and I think that in general I bring both of these cards because I find I use them much more often. These Ranger assaults are the squads that allow you to contest forest areas and dense areas like towns early on. Because they have obviously the napalm, but further to that they have 8 HE at 100 meter range. So not only can they hold their own without their napalm, they have the napalm on top. And a 3-star infantry squad always going to have that lethality, which is fantastic. So I find the Ranger Assaults much more useful. Just don't let them get engaged by like Panzer Grenadiers with their 2 MG42s, because otherwise your Ranger Assaults are going to die very quickly, and only going to be able to return fire with 3 M1 Garands, which give you 2 HE. Not great at all. So be well aware of that. So yeah, in general, let's just have a look at the Phase A units. I've got the 1 unit of Ranger Supports, because I don't find that the engagement range that they are ideal in occurs too often. The Ranger Assaults, you can purposefully put Ranger Assaults in the position they need to be, so I love to have them on the division. Then where Ranger Supports are on the sort of edge of power, you can use the Rifles instead, because Rifles are a lot more reliable than Ranger Supports. They can basically have 8 HE at whatever range. So within 100 meter range they have 8 HE, and with over 100 meter range they have 8 HE, because they have 5 HE on their rifles, on their M1 Garands, and then they have a Thompson for close range and 2 BARs for long range. So either way, they're always going to do the same amount of damage. And for 20 points, rifle squads are a steal. They really are. 12 strength squads, really nice and reliable. So instead of having 2 cards of Ranger Supports like some people do, I like to have those rifles mixed in Phase A. Then of course Ranger Leader is necessary just to have some command. Also, the great thing about the Ranger Leader is it does have the 20 HE power satchel charge, so you can use that to your advantage early on if you're struggling with infantry in close quarters combat. But in general, you want to be keeping them out of the fray, keeping them alive, because I think command in Phase A is actually quite lacking in the way that I've built the division, so I tend to try and keep these Ranger Leaders off the front line wherever possible. Now the other big thing to talk about is the M1919, the 30 cal machine gun. Now this has had like nerfs and buffs. It originally got put down to like 3 strength, which really made it very weak, but recently got increased to 4 strength again. So they're just about worth having, and they're great for sort of forming a solid base of fire. So if you are, for example, being pushed on into a town, having an M1919 pin those units down is very useful. Then you can sort of take advantage of that with your rifles by charging them down. And that's basically what the M1919 is for. It's a stun machine. Can kill off infantry quite easily if they get close, but otherwise really good for stunning at the 600 meter range. Anything beyond that, you want to basically make sure that you're jumping out your 30 cal from the building if something starts to engage it from beyond the 600 meter range. Otherwise it might die pretty quickly. So you've got to be very careful with the use of this, but can be extremely good if used correctly. Now in terms of how this differs from my original choices, it's not too different. I guess the main thing is that I now rely on Ranger Assaults as opposed to Ranger Supports. I used to think that Ranger Supports were really good and I fell into that trap. But now, with the increase of availability of rifles, it's definitely worth having that card in there, like I did before anyway. But rifles accompanied by Ranger Assaults into like forests, really strong combination. And moving into Phase B, you're looking at more rifles. Again, with the buff to the availability of rifles recently, they are well worth having as cards in this division. So you can get 7 in Phase B, you can get 2 or 3 cards of 7 in Phase B, and then you can get cards of 9 of them in Phase C, or 1 card. And I think that's definitely worth having, just a spread of rifles to get you through Phase B and C in the late game. You should, at that point, still have some of your elite troops alive, and where possible, you want to be screening your elite troops with rifles throughout the game to keep the Ranger Supports, Ranger Assaults, even the M1919s alive. So that's what you want to be doing, because that's where the majority of the damage will be coming from in those specific situations. The same thing goes for like the M1919 with like a Ranger Support on the edge of a town, just like demolishing infantry. Make them attack your rifles, not the Ranger Support on M1919, and you'll be good. So it's a very much a balancing act with the 2nd Infantry when it comes to their infantry. Now the other choice that I used to have was some rifle leaders in Phase B, and you can get them in this truck that comes with the 50 cal. But in my opinion, the rifles leaders are just like too expensive compared to like just having more availability of rifles. And like rifles are 20-point squads. You can spam them out for like the majority of the game. Like for example, in Phase B, you can bring in 6 squads in one tick, which is crazy when you think about it. So you could bring in that entire card of rifles if you needed to. You're probably not going to, but that's just something to think about rather than relying on rifle leaders that give you a lot less availability and cost more. So it's all about having the availability in the infantry tab for me, at least, the way I play this division. So that's it for infantry. I'm not going to waffle on too much further about that. If you guys have any questions, then please leave them in the comments or any suggestions and so on. Let's have a look at the tanks. So my tank tab hasn't changed too much. The only difference really is that I took the rhinos out of the division. They don't really hit much without any veterancy, so 4 accuracy on the main gun, just not very good. 12 armor's nice, but it doesn't really make a difference on the engagement range that you're using them at. So generally I would say like you use a rhino, same as like an M4A1, at close range. You want to keep them within like 600 meter range, even if you're engaging tanks, because that's the ranges that they can actually penetrate stuff, especially in the later phases like phase B and C. So like a rhino, for example, or any of the M4s on this division, they have 10 AP. So at 600 meter range or below 600 meter range, you're going to be having 14 AP power because you gain 1 AP power for every 100 meter range. And that is smaller basically. So those are the sort of ranges that you're going to need in order to penetrate like a Panther, for example. If you engage a Panther at 500 meter range, then you have probably about a 40% chance of penetration, which is better than no chance at max range, right? So that's what you're looking at. Anyway, in terms of the use of the Shermans anyway, it's more about infantry support. Like the M4s in Phase A, yes, they do kind of counter half-track pushes, but in general, like, I really enjoy using the M4s for their 50 cals and 30 cals, as well as the HE value that comes out of the M4 cannon, like the main gun, the 75mm. So in Phase A, I've got 2 of the M4 DD, the duplex drive, and they have the 1-star experience that accompanied with a support vehicle will make them 2 stars, and then they're pretty decent. So those are your sort of primary tank support in Phase A, and also provide a reasonable amount of AT as well. Moving into Phase B, I have more availability of M4 DDs, and the reason I have these is because they're cheap. And the main difference between those and like an M4A1, for example, is their speed. The M4 DD is slightly slower off-road and slightly slower on-road, and also you're losing a 30 cal. But for me, the 1-star veterancy kind of makes up for that loss of the 30 cal, and it doesn't make too much difference when it comes to suppressing an enemy infantry squad. So the M4 DDs are steal for 120 points, and definitely worth having more of those coming into Phase B. On top of that, you also have the command variants, which help you with your lack of command. So these can very easily support your infantry squads directly by being next to them and giving them the extra veterancy as well as the firepower they provide. So the M4A1s generally come out every game and are really useful, so definitely worth having in your division. And that uses up all the tank slots. So you don't actually get that much availability of tanks for the amount of slots that you have to use up in this division, which is kind of frustrating. But in general is quite well balanced with the way that the division works as a whole. So this is what my tank tab looks like. Let's move on to the support. So this is where I'm sort of making up for lack of command that I've implemented elsewhere. So in my infantry tab, I had no Phase B command, and therefore you can see that I'm bringing in the M3 commands in Phase A to accompany the Ranger leaders, and then in Phase B I've got the M20 commands to accompany the M4A1s. in terms of command, that is. I wouldn't actually have an M20 with an M4A1, that's a complete waste. But the M3 commands, these are in my division. They're 20 points. They provide a command radius around them that's actually reasonably big. And they are great for accompanying your AT guns. So your AT guns in Phase A, you can get like an M1 gun, for example, with no veterancy, an AT gun with 1-star veterancy. And if you have like an M1 command with them, or M3 command, sorry, then you'll get that extra star that you need. Same goes for like your infantry, although generally with the infantry you would have your ranger leader. Tanks, the M4 double Ds, for example, they are fantastic with the M3 commands. And also the M7s are good with M3 commands. So anything mobile that needs something mobile to go with it, M3 commands do the job. And they're really cheap and will give you that extra veterancy that is so very much needed for a lot of the units to hit accurately, especially the M4s. So that's where the M3 necessity comes in. Now ideally I would like to have some supply in Phase A, but I just didn't really find the activation slot for it to supply mortars. So in Phase B, I'm bringing in 2 of the ducks instead of just 1 in Phase A. And that provides you with a total of 30,000 supply, which is, well, should be more than enough to get you through the majority of the game. Now these T-30s, they may look very nice, but I don't bring them in anymore. I just haven't really found that they are reliable enough and better enough than like an M7, for example, for their value for money. So, not even sure if that sentence made sense, but either way, M7 Double D comes with the 15 HE power direct fire gun at 1,200 meters, plus the 50 cals for if it gets close. Whereas a T-30, if this thing had 1,200 meter range, then it would be great, and I would use it all the time. But it doesn't. It has 1,000 meter range and no like MG armament. So if it's missing its shots, it can get like ran down by infantry quite easily, and other things like AT guns. Like if it misses, it's going to get killed because it'll be in the same range as that AT gun. The M7 can sit out of range quite comfortably and even attack other AT guns at 1,200 meter range by doing the fire position trick. So M7's just in so many ways better than the T-30s, and that's why I basically removed the T-30 and made that an extra activation point availability that I could use elsewhere. So the M7's still on my division like they have always been, and I think that's pretty staple for most people's divisions. Moving into Phase B, however, just going to be relying on some M20 commands. Now there was a buff to the price of the flamethrowers, but I don't think they're really worth an activation slot. Whereas my M20 command, this makes up for, again, a lack of command moving through this division's phases. And a lot of the command does come from the support tab in this division for me. But that's about it, not much else to talk about. I would say the main discussion to have here would be like how you distribute your supplies and where you find the activation points to get the amount of supply you need to support your artillery tab. And I guess if you play this division quite artillery heavy, you might want to mess around with that. But that's mine for now. Moving on to the AT tab. So, in Phase A, plenty of AT guns. M1 guns, I've got the 1 card of 3 M1 guns in Phase A. And then I've got 1 card of the increased veterancy AT guns in Phase A as well. So these were recently added. The card of 2 M1 guns at veteran, and really useful to have about, and would be the choice to bring in before the other M1 guns. Just allows you a little bit more reliability on those guns. In Phase B, same as before, just bringing in the M5 guns. Now I actually removed one of the M10A1 destroyers from Phase B to cater for the extra M1 guns in Phase A. So that's one change that I made. But the M5 guns still remaining there for Phase B. And these are great because they can fire at infantry as well and help pin those down. But in general, that's not what you'd use them for. You'd use them to penetrate higher armor value tanks in Phase B. Then into Phase C, I've got 2 of the 1-star M5 guns. These were never a thing again. Recent addition to the 2nd Infantry just to make their AT more reliable, and are a choice that I replaced with the 4 times M5 guns that I used to have. So I'd rather have 2 with veterancy than 4 without, because I've already got plenty of AT guns in general. And then on top of that, I've got the 2 M10A1 destroyers with the 2-star veterancy. When they have 3-star veterancy, they can be extremely reliable in taking out enemy tanks. So yeah, got them in there. I would say the only thing with the M10s is make sure their turret's facing relatively the right way before you go around a corner or something to snipe something, because their turret moves really slowly and their aim time is horrific. So just be wary of that, and you want them to hit first time, so always have like a command with them. Let's have a look at the anti-air tab. So just 1 card of M15 CGMCs and Bofors now in Phase C. This has changed quite a lot from my original division. I used to have like a bunch of CGMCs and then the Bofors in Phase C, but now I only have 2 CGMCs in total. And the main reason for that is because you have quite a strong air tab, and the CGMCs and the Bofors are more just to supplement that than anything else. So I never really felt like I needed any more availability. You could possibly switch out the Bofors for like MGMCs if you wanted to use them maybe as fire support for ground units, as well as having maybe a bit more lethality in the air, because if the enemy aircraft come into range of like an MGMC, they're going to take a lot of damage with the 16 HE power, and having 5 of them will definitely help you shoot down enemy planes. For me, it's all about stunning up the planes and using your own air force to take them out. So the CGMCs and the Bofors with their 1000 meter range 10 HE power guns, like this CGMC here has the same thing but with a set 37mm. These 250 cals do come into play at 800 meter range, but in general both these units just used to pin down enemy aircraft from afar and help you shoot them down with your own aircraft. And that's pretty much my anti-air explained. Now we have the artillery tab. Now this is where things get interesting, because the artillery tab is one that I think a lot of people have their own opinions on in the 2nd Infantry, and personally I don't really use artillery enough to really know the ins and outs of the artillery tab on the 2nd Infantry. But in my opinion, it's always worth, of course, having the 2-star Ranger mortars, at least 1 card of them, because when they're 3-star, these things fire very quickly, great for pinning down infantry early on, and that's exactly what you want to be using them for. You want these Ranger mortars to cover your infantry in the early phase. The 107mm mortar that I also have in the division, this is great for counter battery. So if your Ranger mortars are being hit by enemy mortars, bring in your 107mm with a 16 HE and hit them from out of range with 1600 meter range. And it works genuinely quite well. I've really had quite good success with sort of baiting enemy to use mortars on my mortars and then hitting them back with even bigger mortars that counter their mortars. Again, hopefully that made sense. Either way, moving on to Phase B, we've got the xylophones. And these are great for saturating an area and stunning them up. Not necessarily going to get too many kills with these, although you can focus down AT guns quite nicely. You just got to hope that multiple rockets land on the same point. But in general, yeah, the xylophones, quite nice. Do soak up a lot of supply, so making sure you have at least 2 ducts on your support tab is necessary to have 2 xylophones on your division. But yeah, these are great. They sort of work a bit like Panzerwerfers in that they have, I think, 3 salvos they can use before they need to be fully reloaded. And you can take full advantage of that if you have to. Now in Phase B there are other choices. You can get more of these 107mm mortars if you want to, but I never really find that I bring in all of my mortars as it is, so having more availability is kind of pointless for me. The M4A1 OP could be useful for its machine gun fire support and the extra off-mat, but again, not really something that I make use of a lot. I would much rather rely on xylophones and have them able to be reloaded. Just make sure when you use your xylophones that you reposition them, because they could be taken out by bombs very easily. There's also the chance to use the M2A1 howitzers with 15 HE at 2,400 meter range. Really quite good artillery piece, honestly, but just not my preference. I much prefer to have the saturation of the rockets and then push on that rather than a continuous fire from the M2A1s. It's just the way that you prefer to play the division. If you think that you would rather use recon ahead of you and take out specific targets with M2A1 howitzers, then be my guest. But in my opinion, I prefer to use the recon to spot the units that I'm going to attack and then push into them very heavily after a xylophone saturation of rockets. That's what I'm aiming for here. Same reason that I have the M3OP with the 203mm off map. Again, just using it to soften up enemy targets before charging in. The great thing about this off map as well is you can dislodge enemy tanks behind like tree lines before you push up. So if somebody's like hiding, I don't know, even something like weak, like Panzer IVs for example, you put 203mm off map, it's going to push them out from behind wherever they're taking cover. So you can pick them off with maybe your AT guns before you move up, rather than having to like run into an ambush on purpose, right? That's just a good example of where you can use the M3OPs, especially if your like Air Force, for whatever reason, is on lockdown because the enemy are using a lot of AA. Right, as for your air tab, again, another interesting tab. In Phase A, I am going to be bringing in the Lightnings, and this hasn't changed. I think having these two P-38 Lightnings in Phase A can be very useful for decks that like to bring out like Spitfire bombers and stuff like that in the early phases. And a Lightning can take down a Spitfire bomber quite easily. So having them there and available is quite nice for the early phases. Also, the fact that I don't have any anti-air in Phase A, I make up for that with having the P-38 Lightning in my division. Moving into Phase B, this has changed quite a lot. I used to rely almost solely on Lightnings and using their rockets and so on. But now I do have the P-47 Thunderbolts on the division, and you can get 3 of those in Phase B, as well as the 2-star veteran one. If you have the pre-order, then you'll get the Gabi as well as like a hero unit. But yeah, 2-star P-47, really, really potent unit this is, and can shoot down aircraft very quickly. Then accompany that with some more P-47 Thunderbolts. If you're struggling against numbers, you should be able to win out. Just be very careful with the P-47 Thunderbolts because their agility is only medium, and against like BF-109s, you can get them shot down very easily. And I've basically shown that in one of my videos before, where I pretty much got all of my P-47s shot down by BF-109s. Wasn't very fun, so just be careful with that. But in general, having that availability there of those P-47 Thunderbolts is welcome. Now moving into the bombers, we've got a P-47 Thunderbolt here with a 230 kilogram bomb. These are great for just simple fly in, drop your bomb and get out of there. If you're struggling with maintaining air superiority with your own fighters, you can still use these because they have 665 km/h speed. So you wait until the enemy evacs their fighters, then you bring in one of these. By the time their fighters are back on the field, you should have dropped the bomb and be getting out of there. The 15 HE should be more than enough to deal with AT guns that get in your way. Then with the P-38 Lightning, same deal. P-38 Lightning isn't as quick, but it has much larger armament. 25 HE power, 450 kilogram bombs. These things do a lot of damage and can take out quite heavy units. I had one of these take out my Jagdpanzer recently, and the Jagdpanzer has 14 front armor. Now obviously you're hitting the top of the unit if like a 450 kilogram bomb drops, but still, really good units have about and will definitely carve a path through any units that you have trouble with. And there you have it. That's pretty much a look at the entirety of my 2nd Infantry Division. So let's just talk a little bit about how they work. In Phase A, you want to be using your M7s with your infantry to push quite hard. If you're struggling against light to medium armor, then bring in your M4s. The M4s are good for dealing with like the 259 half tracks, for example, and just half tracks in general. But you will have plenty of AT at your disposal, so the M1 guns, and make sure you bring in the M3 commands to give them the extra veterancy. Then when you move into Phase B, again, keep an eye on your command, and maybe bring in the M4A1s to support your infantry. You've got plenty of availability of rifles at your disposal, and you should probably still have some range marauders about. So what you can do is just continue to push with the units you already have on your on the field. With like the xylophones, you can bring those in, and just like keep punching your way through until Phase C, where you're going to want to start playing a bit more defensively. Because I would say the main weakness of the 2nd Infantry is things like Panthers. You don't really have much to deal with a Panther. Like the M5 gun might do the job, but at max range, the M5 gun's only going to have like an 18% chance of penetration. So you got to be very careful with that. And it's going to, like a Panther would just pop your M10s and your M4A1s very easily. So you're going to start playing a lot close up, a lot more close up, and basically relying on ambushes and close range engagements into the late game. In the mid game, you can open up a bit and have a bit more of a long range engagement. Same in Phase A, because of your M7s. But yeah, in Phase C, just be very careful. Don't overextend yourself too much, or you might find yourself falling back quite far. But that's about it for the 2nd Infantry. Let me know what you guys think of my division, any changes that you guys would personally make. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.